Hi everyone, good afternoon. It is me, Bridget, or you can call me Bri for short, and I am one of the facilitators for today's module 5.3 that talks about individual differences and theories of intelligence. Now, I hope that you have answered our activity prior to the lesson so that you can understand the relevance of that activity to our lesson. So before we formally start with our lesson, let me present to you our performance objectives wherein at the end of the session, the students will be able to first discuss what is individual differences. Second, to explain the differences in learning. And third, to describe diversity in learning. So as you have observed with your results, you actually have this comparison with your peers that you have distinct results according to the quiz that we have provided, that there are parts that you are good at and you are not good at, and then there are parts that your peers is good at or confident at, and there are some parts which are not. Well, actually, we describe or we define ourselves based on the choices or the options that best describe us, that made us different from one another. Well, in connection to my topic right now, in the science of psychology, the psychologist actually studies people at the three level of focus. Well, it was quoted by Murray and Clockhan in the well-known quotation that says, every man is in certain respects, A like all other men, B like some other men, and C like no other men. And it also supported by Borch and Kumbari in 1997 that says, individual differences are the variations we observe among members of any group in a particular characteristic, such as the temperament, the energy level, the friendship patterns, and the parent-child attachment. Well, knowing all of those differences we have with each other, there are actually variety individual differences that must be a concern of in a certain setting, or let's take for example the classroom setting. Well, there are some prominent characteristics that we observe that are visible, which are the ability when it comes to academic, the achievement level, the gender, the learning style, the ethnicity, and the culture that they came from. Let's take, for example, this picture, the iceberg. Well, actually, in the first day of school, as you have, or you can still recall in your first year, on your first day in Xavier University, actually individual differences jump out instantly. Well, at the tip or the top tip of the iceberg, we can visibly see all the differences of our peers based on the gender and the physical differences of our classmates. But when you say the beneath of the surface of this iceberg are actually students who came from different socioeconomic strata. And what are those socioeconomic strata? Well, those are the students who came from various family configuration, students with special needs. They might have diagnosed with ADHD, autism, dyslexia, dysgraphia, cerebral palsy, and so on. And actually, our classmates or every students have different interests and abilities when it comes to academic and extracurricular activities. Now, students also have different cultural backgrounds that we must be sensitive of. We have to remain sensitive with this with different beliefs, and sustain respect. And then different language, they're actually dialect that they are comfortable with in interacting with their peers or asking the teachers and so on. We actually have different learning styles. When you say learning styles, I know that you already encountered these words many times on our first year, that learning styles rather are those students who prefer more on visual, auditory, kinesthetic, and tactile. And also, we have different attitudes toward the school on how we interact with our peers, the relationship we had with our teachers, and with the environment that we are in, and so on. Now, talking about the term individual differences, according to Galotti in 2004, it says that it is an account for distinguishing characteristics that made us unique. Okay, now, in reference to teaching and learning aspects, individual differences exist. And the psychologists actually agree that there are two types of individual differences. Now, these are differences in abilities and cognitive styles. Now, talking about differences in cognitive styles, it refers to our capacity to carry out cognitive functions. Now, we have 14 different abilities, and actually, according to Galota 2004, it equates our cognitive abilities with intelligence. Now, let's discuss first one of the differences in abilities. Now, let's talk about verbal comprehension. Now, verbal comprehension refers to our ability to understand words, sentences, paragraph, or long compositions such as stories, novels, essays, and so on. Now, one of the example of verbal comprehensions is basically reading comprehension. How do you understand what you are reading? For example, writing a reflection paper, making analysis paper, etc. Next is sensitivity to problems. Now, it refers to our ability to devise approaches and ways on how to solve a particular problem. Let's take, for example, our domain is the student's life. Now, how does the student solve or manage every circumstances that they encountered in their life or in their journey or in their school? Something like that. Now, next is syllogistic reasoning, or the root word is syllogism. It means the art of reasoning. Now, it refers to our ability to conclude or to draw conclusions and inferences. Now, let's take for example this phrase or the sentence that all mammals are animals. That is our major premises or our major assumptions. And then elephants are mammals. Therefore, elephants or all elephants are animals. That phrase or that sentence, all elephants are animals, is our minor premises. Now we draw conclusion based on what we believe in, that all mammals are animals. Since elephants are mammals, therefore they're also an animal. Like that. Next is the number facility. Now, it deals with our capacity to use arithmetic operation. Let's take, for example, we have this case. We have two students in a classroom setting, and then they have equally accurate when it comes to additional skills. Now, however, this one student actually recalls math facts or solutions or answers with ease. Meanwhile, that other students have a difficult time to get the answer or to recall the answer, and it takes him extra half seconds or minute to recall the answer or the formula or the solution. And actually, they also use finger count, or they will use their fingers to count. Like, let's take for example 4 plus 8, that one student can actually in instant or in a snap can answer. 4 plus 4, she or he can instantly answer that 4 plus 4 is equal to 8, while that other student will actually says that 4 plus 4, he will just, or she will use her fingers to count how many 4s or what is the sum of that 4 plus 4, like that. So they have difficult time in reviewing or answering some solutions, or some problem solving. Next is the induction. Now, it's our ability to perceive relations. So there is something relationship on when we conclude something. Let's take for example that teacher A saw students who just leave their trashes on the floor. So she concluded that all students in that school are disrespectful because she saw those students coming from that school who just leave or who are not accountable in throwing their garbages. So she concluded based on what she saw on that subject that all students coming from that school are disrespectful, like that. Next is the general reasoning, or general reasoning is equivalent to generalization. We generalize something based on what we believe in or what we saw. And it refers to our cognitive task to find solutions to algebraic operations. Let's say for example, all bald men are grandfathers, and then Harold is bald. Therefore, Harold is a grandfather because we draw conclusion on what we saw and what we believe in. We generalize everything. as what you can still recall on our first module, that on generalization example, that all Filipinos are lazy like that. So we just generalize everything based on our assumptions and so on. Next is the associative memory. If you can still recall on the module 3, what is associative memory? Now, it pertains to our ability to recall previous experiences in relation to the new ones. Let's take, for example, learning your classmate's name. Then on the next day, you are able to greet them by their name because you use your associative memory. Now, associative memory, let's take, for example, this girl with a long hair and a beautiful eyes is Sandra. Or this girl with a curly hair and a cute face is Nikki. Like that. So you're just using your associative memory to create response. Next is the span memory. Now, it refers to our ability to recall a set of elements after one presentation. One of the example here is this one, my lesson. Are you still able to recall the previous slides? Since we are now here in this particular slides, are you still able to what is the content on the previous slide? Like that. Next is expressional fluency. Now, it refers to our ability to produce different ways of saying the exact words or phrases. Let's take, for example, writing free verse poem praising the sky. I may be able to define the sky gloomy since I think it will rain, but I will just define it as gloomy. And my peer will define sky that it is black and gray or something blue and gray, and it will rain. Like, we have different expressions on what we see, on what we perceive, but we have that common thought. Next is the spontaneous flexibility. Now, it refers to our ability to produce diverse functions and classification of that certain object. Let's take, for example, initiating conversation with your peers or with your parents. Are you able to relate it to another topic, or are you just going to limit it to one topic? Are you able to create diverse classification of that object, that talking about dog, and then you will talk about animals, and then you will talk about biology, somewhat like that. Next is the perceptual speed. Now, it deals with our cognitive task to determine patterns under certain conditions. Now, let's take, for example, putting two different puzzles on the table, and you will let the students spot the differences of the puzzle. There might be students who are good in distinguishing the differences of the puzzle. Meanwhile, there are students who are having a hard time in locating what are the differences or spotting the differences of the two puzzles, like that. Next is visualization. This is actually another cognitive task that we have these manipulative forms of images for us to see how they appear. Let's take, for example, your teacher is showing you a 2D or 3D dimensional object, and how will you perceive that 2D or 3D dimensional object in your mind? Let's say, for example, a 3D dimensional of a tree. Let's take, for example, a tree. Then how will you perceive, or how will you manipulate that form of images in your mind? Oh, tree is like, it might look like this if this will be printed, and so on, like that. Next is the spatial orientation. It refers to our ability to imagine parts that are arranged in space. So there is organization. Let's take, for example, climbing a rock wall. I know that you already know what is a rock wall, right? Now, climbing a rock wall, there are actually different stones or rock in order for you to reach the top. So how will you organize your sequence or your process to climb? That's why you have these patterns in your mind that, okay, I will first touch this rock and then this rock, so on. Next is the length estimation. Now, it refers to our ability to calculate lengths or distances between points. Let's take, for example, you are able to calculate the miles or the distance from your home to school, like that. Then, before we actually proceed to another topic, I think I am too fast. But since this is a pre-recorded video, you can just go back to that certain minute to understand what am I saying again, to make it to make sense. Now let's have first icebreaker activity prior to what we have just discussed earlier. Now, if you have any paper or pen there with you, can you please get it? Or can you just at least participate in this activity? If you have a paper and a pen, can you get it? Then I will show you a slide for you to answer. It's actually something logic. So as you can see on the screen or in the slide, in that particular slide, there is a figure. Now, my instruction here is you have to locate the number 5 in that figure. And I want you to locate it within 30 seconds only. I want you to try it now. Or you can actually just copy the pattern or copy the figure in your paper. You can draw it and then you have to highlight where is number 5. That's it. Okay, now let me proceed to the next slide because I know you can just go back there. Now on the here on our next slide we have the famous 9 dot problem. Since the first one is the 5 pattern problem, we have here the 9 dot problem. Now my instruction here is you have to connect the dots using only 4 lines but without lifting or raising your pen from the paper. Now you have to connect all the dots by using only 4 lines without lifting your pen. I want you to draw those dots and then try to answer it in your paper. Alright. Let's see, I will just give you at least 30 seconds to do it. 30 seconds for the first activity, 30 seconds for this activity, results to 1 minute. Alright. I'm hoping that you have answered the activity to relate or to determine what is your cognitive style. Now, prior to that activity, at least just look your result of your answer and then we will talk about what is your cognitive style. So the differences in cognitive style. Now, according to the Lotte 2004, there are actually 2 stylistic cognitive dimensions, which is the field dependence and independence and reflective or impulsive. Now let's talk first about the field dependence or field dependence and field independence. Field dependence and field independence. Now, those are the cognitive style dimension in which people may have difficulty or ease in ignoring background context to identify parts of the figure as a separate from whole. Now, if you have difficulty in locating the number 5 of the figure that I have given a while ago, and it takes time for you to locate 5 or you're not able to locate 5, then you are field dependent student or field dependent people. Why? Because you are influenced by your learning environment or you are influenced by the intricate patterns that enable you to locate the number 5 instantly, separating from the background from the figure that you are looking for. So it's like confusing. It's like difficult to spot where is the number 5 because of the patterns. However, in contrast, field independent people or field dependent people or students are actually those who can separate the background from the context, because field dependent people, they cannot separate the background from the context, but field independent people, they can separate the background from the context. That's why it's easily for them to locate the number 5. If you are able to locate the number 5 within 30 seconds or instantly, then you are field independent student. Why? Because field independent students tend to be more active students or listeners because they're able to criticize information first, and they have the ability to learn the whole information. Meanwhile, the field dependent people or the field dependent students are actually having a hard time or having hard moments in criticizing information because again they are influenced by their learning environment. I think you can now determine, are you a field-dependent student or field-independent student? Now, talking another type of cognitive style is the cognitive tempo. Now, are you reflective or impulsive? Now, talking about being reflective is you are able to, you know, postpone your decisions. Why? Because you have to examine first the possible consequences of any choices that will be made, and you think several times before you make decision. Meanwhile, on the other hand, impulsive people or impulsive cognitive tempo, they just make decisions quickly. The students make decisions quickly. They give their answers in spur of the moment, and that's why there are tendency that they commit errors because of the hasty decisions. So, while answering the problems right there, are you reflective or impulsive? And some actually referring those cognitive categories to cognitive tempo, wherein there are two types, reflective and impulsive. In the field independence and dependence, it relates to our learning styles. So how do we learn? Now, knowing what is learning styles, actually it is just the individual preferences for the condition of the learning process, and that affects one learning. Now, according to Burden and Beard in 2003, they cited that it includes where, when, and how thus learning occurs, given with the materials he or she learns the best. Now, before we learn, in order for us to learn or have these learning styles, actually use sensory modalities. Now, what are the sensory modalities? Basically, it is just our five senses: sense of sight, sense of smell, sense of hear, sense of taste, sense of touch. Now, it refers to our systems of the students, or our system in terms of interaction with the environment using those five senses that we have. Now, knowing about when we say about what we see in the environment and how we receive those, looking by just looking, it means we use the visual modality. When we hear music, and what we hear is received is through auditory modality. Now, when we talk about touch or feel, it's all about tactile modality. Now, when we say we smell something, it's all about olfactory modality, and how we taste is the gustatory modality. Now, students, we learn best with our preferred sensory modalities, which are very important variables when you say students' learning styles. Now, actually, there are different, or let's say, there are different types of sensory modalities, or the various types of learning that is identified to provide ownership of learning. It is cited by Longworth in 2003. And what are these following learning styles? There is actually four, and those are activist, reflectors, theories, and pragmatics. Now, when you say about activists, those are students who learn by doing. So they are just willing to participate in the classroom, doing hands-on activity, hands-on tasks, or involving themselves in discussion because doing those things, or doing things that they use their hands, their body, their movements, they typically have an open mind doing it, and they don't go to those situations with biases. So they like to brainstorm, having a forum or open group discussions with their peers, and doing problem solving sessions, like using their hands. When you say reflectors, are those who are just watching others, observing others, and then thinking that process, thinking about the things before they act it. So there are more on observational learning with the reflectors, because they observe the sidelines and then they collect the data, and then they take numerous experiences when they perceive work toward an appropriate conclusions. They will just think first, observe, then they will just process everything, the data, and after that they will do the task. So there is just first observation, thinking, high order thinking skills, and then they will perform the task to provide an appropriate conclusion. Next is the theories. Now, these are the learners who would first know the theory before they perform the task. Why? Because these students are actually enjoy following models, following reading facts, or to better engage in the learning process. Well, theory students are actually who loves reading stories, adore books, quotes. They just appreciate the background information as they get it on the books or what they are reading. So they just they just have to first know the deeper background or the deeper abstract or the deeper meaning of that thing before they will perform the task. Next is the pragmatists. Now, when you say pragmatists, are those learners who prefer practical tips and techniques from an expert before they act it. So there are more on reality world. They prefer reality and practical things because they don't like abstract concepts, games. No, they experiment the theories first and the ideas, and then they will come up with their own techniques that is related to the reality world, and they will take time to think about how does those performances on or how what they have done relates to reality. Is it practical? It does. Is that thing make sense? Like that. Now, as though with those learning styles, the activists, theorists, pragmatists, and the reflectors, we actually have also a common learning styles, and this is the VAC. VAC is it means visual, auditory, and kinesthetic. Now, we have to be concerned when it comes to the student learning styles for the reason that we exert a lot of effort to make lesson to be teachable and learnable, but we don't consider the learning styles of our students. That's why there are students who don't excel in that particular subject or in that lesson because you are not able to cater their learning styles. Now, let's talk about the visual. V is for visual. Now, these learners need to see our body languages and facial expression. They prefer to see a picture, an illustration, graphic organizers, images, objects for them to learn. Okay. Now, some examples are the diagrams, books, textbooks, exercise books, and so on. But when you say A is for auditory, these are learners who learn through verbal lectures, verbal discussions, listening to podcasts, and so on. Because for auditory learners, when information is not for the auditory learners, written information is not meant unless it is spoken by an expert or somehow unless it is spoken and heard. So they actually engage themselves in a conversation. There is a taking turn of conversation, and by that they learn something from it. But let's talk about K for kinesthetic. When you say kinesthetic, these are the students who learn by doing. Again, just like the activists. So they are more on prefer to hands-on approach rather than listening to lectures, looking those pictures, illustration. They prefer hands-on on doing something. So they do not comprehend the information unless they manipulate it, or they are actively involved in that kind of learning. So in other words, they just love exploring, or they enjoy exploring the physical world around them, or their nature or the environment they are in. Now, I actually have this third slide wherein it will help you to determine if you are more on visual, auditory, kinesthetic, and tactile. Now, you just have to click the website under the picture, and then try to answer the test for you to able determine what is your specific learning style. And you have time for it to answer. It depends on you on how fast will you answer that question, but please read carefully. Now, So what will be our teaching strategies as a teacher if we have students who are visual, who are more visual, auditory, and kinesthetic? Let's take for example spelling. Now, for visual, do you try to see the world? The word? Do you try to give illustration or a specific example picture of the word? And then for auditory, do you read it aloud? Do you sound out aloud the word and you use phonetic approach when reading the word? And for the kinesthetic and tactile, do you allow your learners to write down the word for them to feel it's right, like that? And we have actually to consider these three type of learning styles. When we are teaching, we have to accommodate our students' learning styles for them able to have an effective learning process. So first, for the auditory, you have to say the word. Let's take for example, beautiful, or you use phonetic approach. Beautiful, you have to read it aloud. And for the visual learners, you have to use illustration or objects to define beautiful. Let's take for example, a model from the magazine, like that. And for the kinesthetic students, you have to allow them to write down the word beautiful for them to learn that, oh, this is the word. The word defines like this. The word, this word describes that a man and a woman who have a good that is good looking, like that. So we have just to be good with our teaching strategies that will cater all the different learning styles of our students. Now, talking about the novices and experts. So novices and experts, actually, they have different approach when it comes to the problems and how they make differences from problems. And when you say expert, actually they perceive more distinctive categories in relationship. There are more, they examine things and they have that mastery level of knowledge. Meanwhile, the novices are actually the beginners type of learners, and they are just starting to augment their knowledge and skill in certain areas, because there might be lessons that are new for them, and they having a hard time to incorporate those lessons to themselves, because it is not easy for them to learn that without an expert. Now, actually, in a classroom setting, it says that teachers are more experts and the students are the novices, but there is a misconception about that. Actually, there are students who are both novices and experts, or there are students, half of the students are experts and half of the students are novices. So if you have students who are novices and experts, what will you do as an educator? Well, you have to modify your teaching strategies to cater your experts and novices, and actually your experts to the students can help you to aid the novices students. Let's take for example, for the expert students, you will give them enrichment activity, and then for the novices students, you will just give them mastery activity. So basically, you have just to modify your teaching strategies, and you don't have to, you don't need, or you must not be biased when you are about to teach your students, because not all students are expert and not all students are novices. Alright, now let's proceed to the age-related differences. Now, age-related differences, according to Campbell and Sharnes in 1990, they concluded that older adults are expected to perform less than adolescents. And one of example of this, that older people tend to forget things and events. Why? Because there actually a research that shown the children's facility with the metacognitive processes increases with age. That's why in the older people, they tend to forget things instantly or events because of the adulting or the aging stage. And older people actually tend to be slow when you say, or when it comes to technology navigation. because in our generation today, or the millennials are more on exposed to the modern technology. That is why it's easy for them to navigate the smartphones we have, and it's easy for us to know the purposes of the tools. Well, on the other hand, the older people or the adults are having a hard time for it to navigate because they are not exposed, really not exposed in the modern technology. So they are slow in navigating some parts of the advanced technology than us. Next is gender differences. Well, gender differences is technically are the male and female, and it is very visible for us to see the differences of every individual based on their gender. Well, actually, talking about gender differences, they have differences in the ways they gather, process, and evaluate information. And one of the examples here, according to research, is that a man's total brain size is more significant than woman's. But a woman's hippocampus, or the learning and memorization, is more significant than men. Why? Because according to research, the females tends to be more flexible than male when it comes to problem solving. They have different process and decision making rather than the male. And other research suggested that men are also good with spatial skills, while females are better than verbal skills. So technically, females and males have different ways in gathering, processing, evaluating their informations. So it's not the same. Now, knowing about all of those differences we had about the abilities, cognitive styles, age, gender differences, we have to plan for those differences. Then, what are we going to plan, or what are the process to plan for the differences? Well, let's talk first. What is differentiation? Differentiation refers to targeting learning goals, using appropriate materials for instruction, and of course, utilizing varied pedagogies for different students' ability. Why? Because we have to tailor our instruction to meet the individual needs of our students. Because they have distinct needs, and we have to accommodate them based on their individual needs. So teachers have to differentiate on the content, the process, the product, and the learning environment within the classroom setting, and to use ongoing assessment and flexible grouping that will make sense, and it will lead you to successful approach to instruction. Now, why do we have to practice differentiated instruction when we are immersed in a diverse environment? We are immersed in a diverse environment that we accommodate or cater students with different learning style, cognitive styles, abilities, and so on, because all children have the right to high equality education. So we should not be biased with our students, because they deserve a high quality education. And also, every child can learn, and also every teacher can learn. So there is a relationship between the teacher and the student, that both of them can learn something from each other. And then learning is a process that involves mutual relationship, just like what I've said earlier, in progress for all of the expected, organized, and rewarded. So there must be an ongoing there must be progressive process. No, now in when we say about the expected goals or objectives within the lesson, within the lecture, or whatsoever, and people in learning system can change for the better. Well, having those high quality education that everyone can learn, people in learning system can change for the better, because of how they grasp the information, and how, because words are important, and how they are used is even more important. Now, When talking about differentiated instruction, we have to consider the 4 classroom elements based on the student readiness, interest, and learning profile. And what are these 4? This is actually the content, process, product, and the learning environment. Now, when you say about content, then the question or the description of this is what the student needs to learn or how the student will get access to the information. So you have to examine the content that you will teach, or in your lecture or in your discussion, you have to consider what are the appropriate information you are going to teach to your students. Next is the process, the activities in which the student engage in order to make sense of or master the content. Are you able to give them appropriate activities prior to the content for them to master what is the content all about, and so on. Now, the product, culminating projects that ask the student to rehearse, apply, and extend what he or she has learned in that unit. So you will just basically give them additional activities or extended activities for them to master the process and the content that they are in. So you will just going to immerse them in some performance that they can interact with their peers or interact with their family or to the environment or to the school or to the resources you will give. Next is the learning environment. You have to match their learning styles, know their interest to the nature of learning. So the way the classroom works and feel, that is it supportive and conducive learning environment for them to have that effective and efficient learning process. So you have to consider your learning environment, that it will be flexible for all the learners and so on. Now, about the 6 strategies for differentiated instruction, there are actually different strategies or accommodation when you say about differentiated instruction. And I actually have 6 here to be presented. And first is differentiate through teams. So it is one of the strategies. Why? Because teams, or how you group your students, is more effective when you group. Teaming or grouping your student is more effective if you group them not based on of the same abilities, but with mixed abilities. Why? Because we have to know why we structured those teams. Are they mixed because they have different when it comes to academic ability, or differentiating between the collaboration skills of those students, or the social economic process or purposes of those students? And are you able to differentiate between passions like that? Because if you group students with mixed ability, then they can come up to a better idea when they do brainstorm. And second is reflection and goal setting. Now, when you say reflection, it is one of the essential components. Why? Because we have to reflect, or through the project or performance task, we have to allow the students to reflect on their work and to set goals further for learning. Let's take, for example, when you give them a performance task, you should let the students to realize if they are able to achieve their goals, and are they able to use it outside the classroom. So it will be a great avenue or opportunity for them to set personalized rather learning goals for them that they might able to apply on their daily lives. And for you also, or for us teachers, to target the instruction for the specific goals that we have set, that we will all achieve those goals after the lecture or after the class. Next is the mini lesson centers and resources. Well, it is actually a great management strategy to prevent the time length that it will make the class boring, dull, and so on. So you have to differentiate, or you have to create a great way to differentiate your lessons. You might give them a mini lessons per group, per peer, per pair, and so on. And perhaps actually you can also use variety of resources for which students can learn in different ways, including video, giving illustration, games, readings, and so on, since we are accommodating different learning styles. Now, next is voice and choice in products. Now, it is also actually another essential component. Why? Because you have to allow your student to show what they know in variety of ways. So we have to differentiate our type of learning when it comes to voice and choice in products. They might be they might have this interest in learning when it is written components, like to be artistic or to be in a theater type, or they can learn some students can learn in summative assessment, or some learners can learn when they will perform and they will come to play their passions, such as role playing, music, and so on. So we have to differentiate our type of instruction to them when it comes to lessons, or how are we going to let them or immerse them in an actual type of learning, in an actual learning process. Next is differentiate through formative assessment. Now, formative assessment can look the same for all students. Yes, they can all look different, but they look different because there are students who learn in different ways, and there are students who are not good in written exams or written performance tasks, but they are good in performance tasks or physical output, but there are also students who are good in written but they are not good in physical outputs. Now we have to consider to differentiate that type of assessment. Now you just have to check along the way their understanding based on the lesson, prior to the lesson, by using multiple types of assessment, especially in grading system. So you can use portfolios assessment, numerical grading system, another type of assessments that you will just give feedback. You will have this positive criticism for the students, and that way you were able to measure their learning or their understanding based on what you have taught to them. So you just differentiate your type of assessment and grading system to each student with different learning style, cognitive styles, and abilities. Lastly is the balance, teamwork, and individual work. Why? Because actually there are students who prefer to work with groups, or they're able to have or meet their goals when they have a peer, or they have a peer or classmates to work on, or they practice more effective learning if you let them do the task by group. But actually there are students who are different from those kind of students. They prefer to work alone or individual. So they need the time to process some information, and it's preferable for them to work alone because they can answer, or they can have that effective or presentable output if they will work outside the group. So you just have to make sure to balance both, so that you are supporting a collaborative learning or a collaborative environment for your students, while allowing some students to have to meet their individual basis prior to the lesson or to the unit that you are teaching them. So that is all my report about individual differences. Congratulations, because you have just completed the first part of the module and you are now able to continue to the next module. I hope that you learned something from it. You're not just looking my video and then you will just let the video play, but I hope you observe something from it that you will able to carry throughout your life. Thank you so much. This is Bri again, and God bless.